Torrential rain batters the country's central region and the capital as monsoon season starts on the peninsula. A car crashed onto a sidewalk in Seoul late last night, killing 9 people and injuring 4. Police are looking into what caused the fatal accident as the driver claims sudden unintended acceleration. The nation's inflation continued to slow in June, only to accelerate 2.4%, but prices of fresh produce and petroleum products remain a concern. It's July 2nd, 2024. This is Newscenter. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon. We start with torrential rain that's been pounding the country. More rain is expected until tomorrow. For more, we have our Choi Soo-hyung standing by in central Seoul. Soo-hyung, what's it like there?
Yes, Jungmin, as you can see just behind me, I'm just right now under the Jamsugyo Bridge, one of the main bridges crossing the Hangang River in Seoul. It's just raining slightly for now. As the monsoon season begins in South Korea, officially on Jeju Island 2 weeks ago, there have been occasional outbursts of rain, but not much. But as of this morning, heavy rain started pounding the southern region and is slowly moving northward, sweeping across the nation. Currently, it has almost stopped raining in the south of the country, but heavy rain is expected to pour in the capital area. According to the weather authorities today, there will be heavy rainfall of 30 to 50 millimeters per hour overall, but a total of between 80 millimeters and 120 millimeters will pour down on the capital and central regions until tomorrow. Usually, rainfall exceeding 50 millimeters per hour is considered heavy, while at 30 millimeters per hour is hard for people to even see what's in front of them.
I see. And Soo-hyung, how are the authorities dealing with the situation?
Right, with heavy rainfall sweeping across the nation, the Ministry of Interior and Safety raised its heavy rainfall warning level from interest to caution on Tuesday morning. The ministry also ordered a level 1 activation of the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures headquarters. With the start of the monsoon season here, the ministry plans to specifically monitor areas at risk of flooding, such as underpasses, riverbanks, and underground parking lots, which it could order closed, while providing alternative routes. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo also instructed thorough safety measures and a close monitoring of the situation to prevent casualties and damage. The authorities will help residents living in areas at risk of landslide and flooding to ensure they can evacuate immediately if dangerous situations occur. Also, the government is advising people to stay away from streams and rivers that are prone to flooding. That's all I have for now. Back to you, Jungmin.
Our Choi Soo-hyung reporting live from the Jamsugyo Bridge. Thank you. Also on the local front, a shocking car crash in the capital last night killed 9 people. Police are looking into what the driver claims as sudden unintended acceleration. An Sung-jin has the latest.
A devastating scene in downtown Seoul on Monday night. A car drove into a group of pedestrians waiting at a crosswalk, killing 9 people and injuring 4 others near Seoul City Hall at around 9:27 p.m. The driver, a 68-year-old man with more than 40 years of experience as a city bus driver, is blaming sudden unintended acceleration. A witness at the scene is saying otherwise.
마지막에 밟은 거예요. 저기 앞에서 다치고 나서 거의 치고 나서요. 그 앞에서. 급발진 차량은 사고 난 차일 때 알잖아요. 전봇대라도 박아야 되잖아요. 그거 없어서 그냥 거기서 딱 멈췄어요.
An expert said that the driver did not try to avoid the pedestrians as you would in case of a sudden acceleration, adding that the deadly accident could have simply been caused by a mistake or carelessness. The vehicle was also seen driving in the wrong direction and collided with 2 vehicles before hitting people. Investigators are not fully ruling out the possibility of issues within the car considering the speed involved, reportedly 100 kilometers per hour.
We specifically checked whether or not he was drinking, and it is understood that he was not under the influence of alcohol.
The police took the driver in on charges of accidental homicide, which falls under violations of the Special Act on the Settlement of Traffic Accidents. In a later briefing, the police stated that the driver was negative in all quick drug tests and had been taken to hospital due to injuries he himself suffered in the accident. Analysis will be carried out by the National Forensic Service on the driver's vehicle, footage from nearby CCTV cameras, and the car's dash cam, as well as statements from witnesses. However, analysis from the National Forensic Service using its event data recorder system can take up to 2 months. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
In other news, North Korea says it tested a tactical ballistic missile carrying a super-large warhead on Monday. South Korea's military, however, yet again dismisses the claim, suggesting one of the 2 missiles launched yesterday fell near Pyongyang. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung has this report.
North Korea on Tuesday morning claimed that it successfully tested a new type of tactical ballistic missile carrying a 4.5-ton super-large warhead the day before. This is the first time that the North has said it tested such a missile. The North state-run media said that the test of the new missile, named Hwasongpo 11 Ta 4.5, was conducted with a mock warhead aimed at verifying flight stability and accuracy to see if it can fly a maximum range of 500 kilometers and minimum range of 90 kilometers. South Korea's military, however, dismissed the North's claim, calling it a deception. According to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the regime launched 2 ballistic missiles, one which flew some 600 kilometers into the sea, and the other which traveled only 120 kilometers. The military once again suggested that the second launch was abnormal and appeared to have fallen in a field in an uninhabited area near the North's capital.
It is extremely rare to conduct a test launch inland, and there is a high possibility that its claim of success is a lie.
Last week, North Korea claimed a successful test of a new multi-warhead missile, contrasting with South Korea's assessment of a failure after a mid-air explosion. The regime's continued claims that appear to be false reveal that the North is trying to cover up its series of military failures, beginning with the recently failed launch of its spy satellite. An expert says the contradicting claims by the 2 Koreas have always been present.
When we take a look at past cases with regard to the success of these missile launches, North Korea treats even the smallest success as a great one, while our military assesses North Korea's small failures as major failures. This is being repeated to this day.
Meanwhile, more missile launches are expected as Pyongyang said it will carry out another test launch of the same type of missile this month to test the accuracy and the explosion power of the super-large warhead. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
The South Korean army has resumed live-fire artillery drills near the border with North Korea for the first time in 6 years. The South Korean military announced Tuesday that the army carried out firing drills using K9 self-prepared artillery units, among others, in Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces. This is the first time such an exercise has taken place within 5 kilometers of the military demarcation line since the Inter-Korean military agreement was signed in 2018. Early last month, Seoul suspended all clauses of the agreement following North Korea's continued provocations, including sending balloons carrying waste over the border. President Yoon Suk-yeol will be dealing with an opposition-led National Assembly for the remainder of his term. With that in mind, today he called for cooperation with the government, urging to end conflicts and confrontation. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon covers his remarks.
With just days to go until the opening ceremony for the 22nd National Assembly, President Yoon on Tuesday emphasized the need for the executive and legislative branches of the government to work together, saying that there was no future if the nation's politics repeated previous conflicts and confrontation.
국정의 목표, 정치의 목표는 하나입니다. 민생의 어려움을 해결하고 국민을 더 행복하게 만드는 것입니다. 이러한 목표만큼은 정부와 국회가 다르지 않다고 저는 믿습니다.
This part of his address to a cabinet meeting comes as Yoon faces an opposition-led assembly until the end of his term. Just the day before, Yoon's close aides, including his chief of staff, were called to appear before the House Steering Committee, whose opposition party members grilled them well into the night about several issues related to the presidential office. Now, a 3-day interpellation session has also kicked off. Yoon's spokesperson said that during the cabinet meeting, the president ordered his aides to take the time to explain in detail to lawmakers and citizens about the government's focuses: proactive global diplomacy, a free market economy led by the private sector, and welfare for the socially vulnerable.
The president said that our government's proactive global diplomacy is not focused on domestic political calculations, but rather on expanding the horizons of diplomacy to enable our businesses and citizens to participate more extensively on the international stage.
He also emphasized that for the economy to thrive, businesses must grow, underscoring that proactive global diplomacy is directly tied to the well-being of the people. Yoon also mentioned that the country's low birth rate and aging population have reached a state of a national emergency that requires urgent attention. Amid fierce clashes between the ruling and opposition parties, Yoon also raised the need to narrow differences through rational dialogue and consensus, saying the government and parliament both share the goal of improving the people's livelihoods. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Starting today, lawmakers are quizzing government officials in Parliament until Thursday. This comes after rival parties recently finalized the formation of the 22nd National Assembly after a month of wrangling. For more, our political correspondent Shin Ha-young joins us in the studio to give us the overall picture and what's to come next. Good to see you, Ha-young.
Great to be here, Jung-min.
First, what does the formation of the new assembly look like?
Well, Jung-min, after weeks of bipartisan wrangling, the rival parties last week finally decided on how to share the leadership position of standing committees. And this is almost a month after the 22nd National Assembly commenced its 4-year term. And for the next 2 years, the ruling People Power Party will lead 7 committees, including Strategy and Finance, where the government's spending plans are approved. And the majority Democratic Party will head 11 committees, such as House Steering, which is in charge of issues related to the president's office. And it is customary to divide the 18 standing committee chair positions in proportion to the number of seats held by each party.
Ha-young, the rival parties have clashed a lot, causing delays in forming standing committees. What is behind the delays and what does that tell?
Well, actually, the main reason behind that is the competition for key committee chair posts, which are Judiciary, House Steering, and also including the broadcasting committees. And the PPP called for negotiations to secure the judiciary leadership, claiming that it is crucial for partially preventing the majority DP from pushing through all its bills. And this is because the DP has the authority to review, revise, and even reject bills before they go to a final vote. And in the end, the ruling party accepted the 7 other standing committee chair positions proposed by the DP, stating that they could no longer delay forming the assembly due to urgent issues affecting people's livelihoods. And one thing I'd like to point out here is that despite their conflicts, both parties share the same priority of focusing on people's livelihoods in the new assembly. First, let's take a listen to what each party had to say.
We will prioritize passing bills and allocating the budget to address urgent issues regarding people's livelihood announced on May 31st. We will now shift the focus of the National Assembly from political conflicts to taking care of people's livelihood.
Currently, pending issues regarding people's livelihoods have accumulated across standing committees. Delaying the passage of a special act, which supports the victims of real estate fraud, will only worsen public suffering. The DP will push to speed up the passage of the bill.
The PPP announced its first set of bills in the new assembly focused on improving people's livelihoods. And this includes establishing a government body focused on tackling the low birth rate. And it will also push to abolish taxes on financial investments and reform the inheritance tax rate. And on the other hand, the DP introduced what it calls a #1 livelihood bill, which if enacted would provide vouchers worth around 250,000 Korean won or around $180 to people in Korea. And they say the voucher will boost spending and help revive the economy.
The Parliament is now ready to work at full capacity. What are their key tasks?
Well, Jungmin, people are expecting to see what's being called a working National Assembly from the newly formed parliament. And the assembly is actually also working on to make some efforts to address the people's needs. And meanwhile, according to the National Assembly bill information, as of Monday, a total of 1,248 bills have been proposed within the month since the start of the assembly, setting a new record. However, while eyes are on whether the new assembly will be more productive, some worry that excessive legislative competition may lead to poorly created bills, resulting in few being passed. And this is because the previous parliament also set records for bills, but actually had the lowest passage rate. And at the 22nd National Assembly, pending issues include tackling the low birth rate, aging population, and national pension reform. And in the previous assembly, the rival parties launched a special committee for pension reform, but were unable to reach a consensus.
And finally, walk us through some key events for the new assembly.
Sure. As you said in the beginning, starting today, lawmakers are quizzing government officials during parliamentary Q&A session. And today's session focuses on politics, diplomacy, and security. And after Q&A session, the opposition-led assembly is planning to vote on a special prosecution investigation into the death of a Marine. And in response, the PPP is planning to try to block the bill with a filibuster. And a bill with the same goals was also passed in the previous 21st National Assembly, but was vetoed by President Yoon. And meanwhile, the 3-day session will bring the June extraordinary session to an end, and representatives of the two sides will take the podium next week following the 22nd National Assembly's opening ceremony on July 5th. So I guess we'll have to keep a close eye on the future development.
All right, thanks for the report today, Hayo.
My pleasure.
Korea's consumer price index accelerated 2.4% in June, the slowest pace in almost a year. But high costs of fresh produce and petroleum products remain a concern. Our correspondent Moon Hae-ryun reports.
Inflation in South Korea is showing signs of stabilizing in the 2% range despite continued high prices for fruit. Data from Statistics Korea on Tuesday shows that the country's consumer price index, a key gauge of inflation, rose by 2.4% in June compared to the same month the year before. This is the lowest figure seen in 11 months, inching closer to the target inflation at 2%. The rise in consumer prices hovered above 3% at the start of the year before dropping below the 3% mark in April and remaining in the 2% range for 3 consecutive months. Core inflation excluding volatile food and energy prices came to 2.2%, while the index measuring 144 daily necessities rose by 2.8%. Prices for fresh produce drove these figures, with the cost of fresh fruit rising by more than 31% on year. Apple prices jumped over 63%, while the cost of pears more than doubled. Petroleum prices also showed the largest hike in a year and a half, surging by 4.3%, with a spokesperson from Statistics Korea claiming that this was due to the base effect of petroleum prices being low this time last year. Speaking at a meeting to discuss these latest figures, the first Vice Minister of Economy and Finance said that this falls in line with earlier predictions from the government for prices stabilizing in the mid-2% range in the second half of the year. Meanwhile, the Agriculture Ministry pledged to stabilize the supply and demand of vegetables vulnerable to summer rain and heat, as well as preemptively managing potential risks such as diseases affecting fruit trees. Starting yesterday, the government applied a new tariff quota to 7 different types of food ingredients such as coffee concentrate, as well as extending the lower tariffs on 28 types of fruit until the end of September. It will also strengthen inspections on the oil market after the partial return of taxes that scaled back the fuel tax cut on gasoline from 25% to 20%. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
In sports news, Korea's Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism on Tuesday announced detailed support plans for Team Korea at the Paris 2024 Olympics. From July 12th to August 11th, a base camp will be set up at the National Center of La Défense in Fontainebleau, providing accommodation, training facilities, and medical services. Badminton, boxing, and judo athletes will have their training partners there to help them prepare. And to promote Korean culture during the Olympics, the ministry will open the Korea House at the Maison de la Chimie Conference Center in the French capital. This venue will host a hanbok fashion show, exhibitions, K-pop classes, and music performances. The games will run from July 26th to August 11th. The eldest member of K-pop boy band sensation BTS Jin will reportedly be a torchbearer at the 2024 Paris Summer Olympics. He will depart for France shortly to participate in the torch relay for the Olympics, while the exact location and schedule have not been disclosed yet. After carrying the torch in the Olympics as the first BTS member to complete his mandatory military service, Jin is set to make his official comeback to the entertainment industry with variety show appearances and the release of a new album later this year.
It was clear and hot yesterday, but today it is raining a lot across the country. This rain is expected to remain strong and heavy. The expected amount by tomorrow will be up to 120 millimeters in Gangwon-do and northern Gyeonggi-do provinces, and more than 100 in the Seoul metropolitan area. Up to 80 millimeters is also expected in the southern parts of the country. The rain will mostly stop tomorrow afternoon. In addition, gusty winds are expected in most parts of the country by tomorrow. Currently, a strong wind warning is issued for Jeju Island and strong wind advisories on the west coast and the coastlines of Jeollanam-do province. Please pay special attention to avoid safety accidents. Tomorrow, Daejeon, Gwangju, and Busan will start off at 24 degrees Celsius. It will move up to 27 in Seoul and Busan, Daegu and Gyeongju, 32 degrees. Meanwhile, daytime temperatures will slow down as it rains. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
And that is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. 24시간 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Presiding over Monday's cabinet meeting following his latest diplomatic agenda in New York, President Seoul South Korea's economy will grow. The central bank has kept its key interest rate unchanged.
Mission complete for rocket booty South Korea.
Seoul is rallying in hopes of bringing the World Expo 2030.
Arirang.
South Korea has a lot of titles under its belt, rising from the ashes of the Korean War to becoming the world's 10th largest economy. But despite the remarkable economic growth, the nation struggles with individual happiness, frequently ranking low on related indices. It has the highest suicide rate among OECD member nations, and more people died from suicide than COVID-19 during the pandemic, according to the health ministry. Numerous scholars around the world have looked into why South Koreans aren't happy. In response, the government has announced plans to reform the nation's mental health policies to better support those suffering from mental illnesses. On today's Within the Frame, we get a deep dive into Korea's mental health problems, optimal direction for reform, and explore lessons from other advanced nations that have undertaken similar paths. For some insights, we have Professor Hwang Sun-mi at Torch Trinity Graduate University joining us virtually. It's so great to have you with us.
Glad to be here.
And for a U.S. perspective, Michael Bernstein, professor of psychology at Penn State Abington, joins us from Pennsylvania. Welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
All right, Professor Hwang, let's kick things off with you. President Yoon Suk-yeol has vowed an overhaul of the nation's mental health policy, promising to create a new presidential committee dedicated to overseeing mental health issues among Korean citizens. Does this indicate that the mental health of South Koreans has deteriorated to a level where it demands national attention?
Well, unfortunately, I have to say yes. South Korea has been at the highest suicide rate among OECD countries for over decades, as we all know. This trend has been consistent since early 2000, which means we now have two major assignments to solve. First, of course, we need to figure out what causes the individual make the self-injured choices and how to reduce it. But on the top of that, we have to take care of the rest ones too. Who has to be exposed to the news several times and have to live with the ongoing grief. That will be our second assignment. One person's mental health problem, I'm not talking about just the suicide itself, but I mean the diverse kind of psychological distress in daily life deeply affect the people around the person, like family, colleague, and friend. Because we live in such a small society and we are all connected to each other. If we remember, recently we lost several celebrities to suicide. We all experienced the loss of the shared moments with them. And people also lost the future opportunities to have a dream with them and have grow with them. The scope of loss is larger than we expected. Unfortunately, according to the World Happiness Report this year, South Korea ranks 52nd in the world in terms of happiness index. Subjective feeling of happiness is psychological resource that individuals cope with daily stresses. A low level of happiness, therefore, indicates that we may be more vulnerable to emotional stress. People seek professional counseling for different reasons, but common issue includes the feeling of unhappiness that we are talking about right now, and depressive feelings. This is the major one, mood fluctuation, and various anxiety-related symptoms. And I have been experiencing that the level of symptoms that people are reporting are gradually getting severe. So yes, indeed, I think South Korea has reached the point where we all have to take a serious action for it.
You just mentioned about the World Happiness Report, and in another global survey, South Korea's life satisfaction level ranked 35th out of 38 nations between 2020 and 2022, according to recent data. So clearly, there is widespread unhappiness among South Koreans. Hopefully, the envisioned presidential committee, the first of its kind, will help address the country's worsening mental health issues. Now, Dr. Bernstein, I understand that the UK has a government minister to lead suicide prevention efforts, while Japan has a minister of loneliness to help alleviate the social isolation of certain groups of people. Are most advanced economies addressing mental health issues through national policies?
It's a great question. And the answer is that there's quite a bit of variability, but there are a lot of countries that are engaging in mental health policies to try to address these issues. So in the U.S., the U.S. Surgeon General last year declared a national loneliness and social isolation epidemic throughout the country. The head of the African Union Youth Envoy identified loneliness as a significant threat to mental health, as well as directing resources or asking for resources to be directed to other mental health issues in the African Union. And the WHO just commissioned a new commission on social connection, citing the absolute importance to social connection and how this plays a role in mental health. So there is quite a bit of activity among governmental agencies trying to address mental health. And some countries take more active steps by the government to address these actions. And sometimes that's about directing resources and funding to identify interventions. And sometimes it's about actually enacting those interventions in respective populations. These programs are often aimed at children in primary schools, adults in communities, or seniors for whom these sorts of interventions can be extremely effective in promoting mental health. But the World Bank recently came out and said that all countries are considered developing countries in the context of mental health, as all are lagging in addressing the growing burden. So even though there's a lot of work being done in many countries, even in these most advanced economies, there's still quite a bit of work left to be done.
So the specific measures may vary, but it sounds like many developed countries, such as the UK, many European countries, as well as Australia, have comprehensive national mental health policies. And in case of the US, the country has a policy at the state or provincial level rather than the national level, which we'll discuss more in a bit. But before that, Professor Hwang, a recent survey by South Korea's health ministry showed that the majority of Koreans think that the government's suicide prevention efforts actually help. From your perspective, are national level policies and efforts effective in suicide prevention?
Of course, definitely. I agree that the intervention at the national level has a significant impact. The nature of suicidal intervention should be prevention, because once suicide occurs, it cannot be reversed. So prevention efforts must be proactive, like a hotline system and primary crisis counseling centers should be available 24 hours, 7 days. Establishing these facilities and staffing them requires quite amount of money, which makes impossible other than nationwide services. When discussing national suicide prevention policies, Finland is the good example that cannot be overlooked. In the 1990s, Finland has a suicide rate that was twice more than OECD average. But since taking proactive measures starting in 1992, Finland has made remarkable progress in suicide prevention. The suicide rate, which was once 30 per 100,000 people, dropped to 12.9 by 2020. And this number is about half of the suicide rate recent years of Korea. And Japan is another country made a reduction in suicidal attempt. For instance, Japan no longer ranks second after Korea. Its ranking has dropped. Those two countries established community support counseling centers and network where individuals can easily find the professional help. Providing hotline service is a very important initial crisis intervention. And I think implementing workplace welfare program and take care of employees' mental health is really crucial, because a lot of Koreans, majority of Koreans, spend a lot of time in workplaces. Promoting public awareness campaigns to reduce stigma around mental health issues and suicide encourage people to seek help early. But these interventions have been pursued in Korea as well. Well, however, what seems so helpful is to build up such effort into national policies, set clear objectives, and consistent drive toward the singular goal of protecting the possible loss. Well, I think suicide may seem very individual issue, but if we address this issue collectively, and if society collectively send a message when there is somebody for you, then this can be addressed effectively.
Professor Bernstein, it's known that 1 in 5 U.S. adults lives with a mental illness. Give us a bird's eye view of the framework of mental health policies in the U.S.
Of course. So Professor Huang is absolutely right concerning the significance of the issues of mental health, and also that this is a collective action problem. They're a very significant concern in the U.S., and recently the Biden administration has tried to engage in kind of steps towards addressing these issues. They've expanded funding for access to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, a good example of a service that cannot occur at the individual level, that really is best rolled out at the national level. A huge barrier to mental health is people having access to support and care. There's a significant workforce shortage, and the administration recently took steps through the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Department of Defense to hire more personnel to actually attend to mental health among its respective populations that they serve. They've also done quite a bit of work to fund certified community behavioral health centers, which provide 24/7 comprehensive primary and behavioral health care. So these are organizations that exist within a community, staffed by members of the community, by community partners, and are available 24/7 to address sort of these concerns. The Department of Health and Human Services expanded access to local communities through a mental health crisis response partnership pilot program, again, allowing community partners to kind of develop interventions and ways of helping their communities. And there's also been work done by the Department of Health and Human Services for people in long-term care facilities. This is a place where mental health problems are often rather significant because of, again, social isolation and loneliness. Again, though, there's quite a bit of work left to be done. And I'm hoping for more resources to be directed in these ways.
Thank you for that great summary of a wide range of measures being taken in the U.S. Professor Huang, President Yoon has vowed to provide psychological counseling services to 1 million people during his term. But due to Korea's strong social stigma surrounding mental illnesses, many are hesitant to seek professional help, even when experiencing mental health issues. How does the number of people undergoing psychological counseling in Korea compare to that in other advanced countries like the U.S. or the UK?
Okay, as you said, starting from this July of this year, the Korean government has launched the government support program called 마음투자. One of the main purposes of this program is to reach to the 1% of Korean population to receive the professional counseling and psychological services. Actually, the 마음투자 was not the first step. And in the last 5 years or so, there have been government-supported counseling services for young adult people, for the victims of sexual violences and stalking violences in Korea. And as a mental health professional, I also participated in these programs to provide counseling services. And I have certainly seen the younger the population is, the easier it is to get for the professional help. However, the problem is that these supports are mainly provided in Seoul and Gyeonggi area. Therefore, qualified institutions to get help are also concentrated in Seoul and Gyeonggi area. Naturally, two problems become our remaining homework. The first is to provide better hospital and better counseling centers in every provinces of Korea. And the second is to make the service much more easier and accessible to the older generation and to the people who has less educated populations. Because these people tend to be the one lack social information, avoid help, and isolate themselves, and for the fear of social stigma, as you said, despite severe mental illnesses. statistics show that the visit to mental health services are 22.2% in Korea and 39.5% in Belgium, 46.5% in Canada, and 43.1% in the United States. But as I already mentioned, we have to diagnose this number by age and region. And I think if one particular population's engagement rate drops significantly, we need to promote it in a proper way for the population and make it much more easier to get it.
I'm sure there are people out there here in Korea that want to reach out, that want to seek professional help, but are, they refrain from doing that because of all the negative aspects that come with it. They're worried about a lot of things. Of course, they're worried about the strong social stigma. So I think it's really time for us to make a change and make those psychiatric help much more accessible for them. And the tasks that you listed are, I think you highlighted the very important tasks that we need to address to get there. Now, Professor Bernstein, the U.S. has been expanding measures to provide community-based services to help people with mental illnesses. Could you tell us a bit about this and also about the Healthy People 2030 initiative? Have they been effective?
Those are great questions and happy to do so. So as I mentioned before, the U.S. has been looking at a number of ways for community partnerships. The Certified Community Behavioral Health Centers developed by or funded in part by Health and Human Services have been really helpful, in part because they do exactly what we were just talking about. They're trying to destigmatize by using members of the community to normalize that mental health is like anything else. You know, we would spend, very few of us would be upset if we had a broken finger or a laceration. In going to the doctor, we wouldn't feel as though that was stigmatizing because we see physical health as something that could be treated and that isn't our fault, because it's not. But for mental health, we often feel as though we're to blame or we're going to be judged for this. And as a result, we don't seek professional help. So these community-based partners are really aiming to try to normalize getting support for mental health. And that mental health is something that lots of people need support with. And so these local governments within the United States are often finding ways to create centers where experts can be part of the community, often from the community, to support the communities themselves. To your second question about Healthy People 2030, this is a 10-year plan by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. It launched late in 2020, so we're about 4 years in, and it has the overarching goal of improving health and well-being for all people across their lives, and in particular to eliminate health disparities. There are obviously health disparities that exist within the U.S. This is true for many cultures, and so the Healthy People 2030 is trying to find ways to reduce those disparities. And very briefly, it looks at 5 determinants of social health, things that are within the control or the ability to change much more easily than things like genetics or things like personal behavior. And those 5 things are kind of economic stability, educational access and quality, healthcare access and quality, neighborhoods and built environments like having safe housing and good transportation, access to food, and then social and community context, making sure that people have the social support through mentors and community members. And I think some aspects of the program are more successful than others. They're actually constantly examining their own data and updating their website. It's actually a very nice website where you can go and see of their measures that they're kind of evaluating themselves on, how are they doing, and you can see the data they use to determine whether or not they're succeeding or they haven't done enough, or in some cases things have gotten a little worse.
Well, studies have shown over time that community-based mental health policies, those services, reduce stigma and inequalities. So there's a lot we can learn from the various initiatives taken by the U.S., which leads us to our next question. Professor Hwang, the Yoon administration has rolled out ambitious tasks for the new presidential committee. It aims to increase the number of mental health emergency medical centers threefold while building more mental rehabilitation facilities across the country. And it also plans to provide new homes for those with mental illnesses each year. But all these measures will need cooperation from communities. What are some lessons we can learn from the U.S.?
Well, the situation between the United States and Korea is different. So we cannot just follow the examples of the United States exactly. The same goes for other countries also. Healthy People 2030 focus on the prevention, screening, assessment, and treatment of mental disorders. The line of model looks perfectly ideal, but only in a society where psychological assessment and treatment are well equipped. I think for Korea, we need to work harder on early crisis response and best and accurate diagnosis first. I personally believe that we need more diagnostic experts than we do right now, and we need to gather more basic research data for later. And depending on the diagnosis, we also need a manual that all experts can follow the same sequences. Community care, indeed, of the United States, which promote more people to serve each other, is something we can learn from, I think. The community care policies emphasize peer support, mutual aid by giving and receiving volunteering help, and supportive group for people who are having similar circumstances. Promoting community care is challenging for Korea, though, because Korea is where everybody is busy and individualism is increasing, and majority of housing is apartment. So we are not yet clearly can have the answer for that yet, but we should create our own community care in a way that that's right for our culture.
And our last question is also for you, Professor Hwang. What direction should South Korea's mental health policy reform take, and what are your prospects?
I felt very a great news. I felt it was a great news that Korean government shows interest and effort in improving the mental health of people. As a mental health professional who closely witnesses people's psychological distress, daily lives, I feel released to hear that news. But I hope, though, that the policy will take a long-term perspective, because the psychological issue people experience today have been shaped over several generations. In family counseling, there is a concept called homeostasis, where people actively create coping mechanisms to survive, even though their suffering may appear only a problem. Therefore, trying to eliminate or change in a short period of the time could lead to unexpected problems and increase people's reluctance to change. It would be helpful if the government could anticipate some of these phenomena and respond with long-term perspective. Long-term perspective is really important, I think. And also, it would be also beneficial to involve more mental health professionals in administrating these policies. Another important opinion I want to add is importance of prevention itself. If people seek help early, we can reduce the severity of mental symptoms. So just as government show interest in high-risk groups, I think it's important there is also a need to focus on the ordinary people who may experience a mild psychological distress, because those are the people, and those who recover from mild distress can actually become our human resources we talked about before. And those people become capable of community care. So my expectation is two things: to have a long-term perspective and have more effort to prevention.
All right, it's a perfect place to end our discussion today. Thank you so much, Professor Hwang and Professor Bernstein, for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.